Hello and welcome to Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown. Thank you for joining us. This week we are focused on violent crime in the metro area. Yes, Jackson sees the worst of it, but it spells trouble at the county level as well. What strategies do we need to follow to curb it? We'll speak at length with Professor Kevin Levine. He teaches criminal justice at Jackson State University and a longtime police veteran. Also, we'll recap a raucous debate between the candidates for sheriff of Hinds County. That special election is just 2 days away. That's all ahead on Mississippi Insight. Most everyone you meet in Jackson seems to acknowledge that violent crime and property crimes are huge issues in the city, but the question remains, what are we going to do about it? We put that question and more to this morning's guest. Professor Kevin Levine is a criminologist at Jackson State University. He began his career in 1989 as a military police officer, and he worked for years in the Jackson Police Department. And he's currently a part-time deputy with the Hinds County Sheriff's Department. Professor Levine, welcome to Mississippi Insight.
All right, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Tell us first of all, when did you join JPD?
I joined JPD in the fall of 1991 as a recruit, in the 18th recruit class.
Compare crime in Jackson when you started on the force and to the situation we have today, and what's different then to today?
Well, when I came on, there was a big push with my class, the 17, 18, and 19, to bring the department up to full strength. And so those three classes were supposed to bring us up to the full strength, which they did. And what that allowed us to do was have specialized units like DART. Some of the people from back then might remember the DART unit, that they were boots on the ground when dealing with what we call hotspot areas, and it was very effective. So the manpower was there, the resources were there, and we were very successful with that. We were very successful.
Let's focus on violent crime for a moment. If you check our studio monitor here, there's an interactive graphic for the Gun Violence Archive that shows that all documented shooting incidents in Hinds County since about 2014 includes fatal and non-fatal shootings, gun violence, and is not limited to the city of Jackson. In your experience, has violent crime always been so widely spread across the city?
When I came on, when I was in JPD back in the day, it was relatively confined to the Precinct 3 area, Precinct 2 area. Those were the hotspot areas. Those were the areas that when I came out of the academy, they came and the then Commander Bender, he came to the precinct and he came to the academy and said, hey, I need some go-getters from the training class, because he wanted us to go out and be a very, very active, proactive into suppressing the drug problems that were there on Brown and Woodrow Wilson, the Martin Luther King area. We had at that time Maple Street Apartments. We had Christian Brotherhood apartments that were hot. So we had hotspot areas, but it was pretty much confined at that time to where we knew and we can direct our resources and manpower to effectively target those areas.
What are we missing in the way that we fight crime in Jackson today? What's going on that we're not doing?
Well, as I stated, manpower and resources. You can have the best laid plan in the world, but if you don't have the manpower and the resources to execute that best case practice, then you're just spinning your wheels. You're behind the eight ball, I should say.
And when you talk about manpower, what are we talking about? A certain number of officers that we need, or what
Yes.
we talk about as far as manpower?
Most definitely. A number of officers. We have to have that manpower in order to have specialized units, and not only just specialized units, you need to have enough officers to where when we have these hotspot areas, there's a thing called directive patrols, where these other officers can answer calls, the regular calls, and not get tied up on directive patrols. That will free the regular beat officers up to actually handle the calls. And then the other officers, if we had extra officers on the beat, if you had 7 beat and you had 11 officers, then you can assign those other officers to handle those directed patrol areas. And that way you could kind of get a good gauge on where your problems are. Directed patrols are very, very effective.
And I know in the early mid-2000s there was about 400 police officers within JPD, yes. And their push was getting up to 500 officers.
Yes.
But the population was higher in the city.
Yes, it was.
The population has declined. What are the recommended numbers that JPD actually needs now, and where are we today?
Well, I haven't seen officially where the count stands, but from what I see, I would think around 500 would be the magic number for what we're having going on in the city of Jackson. If we can get up to around 500, I think that will give JPD the resources, being in manpower, that they need. But of course, along going with resources with manpower, you're going to need the financial resources too from the city to get vehicles and the things that these officers are going to need to go out there and effectively do their jobs.
So they still need that many officers, even though the population of the city has decreased?
Yes, I would think to stay on top of that, I would say that would be a pretty good, safe bet for the number of officers Jackson will need, because you just don't want to get a handle on it. Once you get it under control, then you want to be able to fully go into what we call proactive policing. Right now, we're doing reactive policing. And the problem with reactive policing is the criminal element is dictating your resources and your manpower. So you're pulling those officers, you're having some of those officers work overtime, which is killing your overtime budget. It has a lot of other different effects where you could have a deficit, and the citizens suffer when you have that low number.
With the police shortage that's across the country, is it realistic that the city can get that many officers?
I think it's realistic, and let me tell you why. I am the academic recruiter for Jackson State, and I see Dallas Police Department come to the city, and they recruit my students twice a year. Twice a year. The Texas State Troopers recruit my students twice, when I say in semesters, I should say. But the fundamental difference is pay. They're coming in and they're paying these guys $60,000 out of the academy. So if we get that pay commensurate to what they're doing, those officers that we're losing to Texas, Memphis, the city administrator from Memphis came and told me, with all due respect, we chose Jackson because we looked at the pay scale and you guys were one of the lowest around. So he said, I don't mean no harm, but we need to steal some of your guys.
Talk about broken windows policing, and how does that focus on so-called quality of life crime impact violent crime?
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in the broken window theory. I know some academics say it doesn't work, but it does work if you apply it in the right situation. It was actually used by Rudy Giuliani back when New York in the 80s had one of the highest crime rates in the country, and he was able to bring them down to one of the safest cities. And at the basic premise of the broken window theory is based on this. If you have a house in a community that goes vacant, okay, and if no one takes care of it, you're going to get one broken window. Well, if you don't cut the grass and replace that broken window, what will you have? The rest of the windows will begin to be broken. And that starts to spread. The neighbor next door, he gets tired, what does he do? He moved. The one on the other side, he moved. And when the caring community moves out, well, those individuals who want to do wrongdoing, they say, hey, well, these people don't care about their community, so let me go in and I'm gonna set up shop. And they set up shop in those abandoned houses. So the broken window theory is focused on addressing the smaller crimes that will become gateway to larger crimes. For an example, with New York, they attack turnstile jumping. Well, people say, why are you worried about somebody jumping the turnstile? Well, generally, a person who's jumping the turnstile, which is not legal, but they're on their way to commit a bigger crime. So if you stop them at the smaller gateway crimes, then you can have an impact. You don't always have to have the home run hits. You just want to attack the small. That's where the quality of life issues come in. And once you attack those quality of life issues and don't let them slide, because they're very important. So the broken window theory is based on that premise. So I used it back in the 90s at JPD, and we were very successful in the Martin Luther King area. We had those houses torn down. We used it to have Maple Street apartments taken over by the federal government and torn down. And I was able to clean up one area and didn't have to make one arrest. So it is very effective.
But some people compare broken windows to stop and frisk, and there was some criticism of a stop and frisk. Do you buy that?
No, it's not. It's not. Stop and frisk is a method of officer safety. When you frisk someone for your own personal safety, it's not dealing with the individual on that level of a stop and frisk. Broken window deals with quality of life issues, at the basic foundation of what a person would want to have in their community. For instance, if I tear down a vacant house, well, if I just leave it grass, what's going to happen? Weeds are going to grow. But if we get in and we tear that house down and we get with the community leaders and get those community leaders and say, hey, let's put a green area here. It actually it helps empower the community to have a say-so in what direction their community is going in. And it sends a strong signal to the criminal element that these individuals in this community care. So that's what the broken wing is. It's far from stop and frisk.
We'll have more from our conversation with Professor Levine in a moment. First, we'll take you to Jackson State for last week's Hinds County Sheriff's debate. Mississippi Insight returns in a moment. Last week, 8 of the 13 candidates for the sheriff's office in Hinds County offered voters a chance to hear about crime issues particular to that community. They met Tuesday night for an intense debate at Jackson State University, and 12 News' Anthony Howard was there.
What do you think they see when they look at the city of Jackson, what they're seeing on national news right now? Would you move your family here?
Student moderators asked each of the candidates a series of 8 questions, granting them a minute for their response and 30 seconds for rebuttal. The first question was potential solutions for the high crime rate in Jackson.
Take illegal guns off the street. Ladies and gentlemen, the biggest problem in our community right now is these dirty guns. Dirty guns are guns that are in possession by convicted felons.
People that are responsible for these crimes are in your community, and we need you all to feel comfortable enough to be able to report that information back to your nearest law enforcement agency as well.
The FBI is big on collaboration, working with different agencies in order to resolve issues. As your sheriff, I will work closely with all these organizations.
Candidates also promised more transparency between the department and the public.
There's 1,500 warrants that are unserved that the citizens of Jackson are in the dark about. If you serve the warrant, you take the gun off the street. If you serve the warrant, you take the criminal off the street.
Candidate Leon Seals plans to reinstate task forces disbanded by prior administrations. Other candidates discussed plans to work with the community and other members of the Justice Department.
That are committing these crimes aren't first offenders. You have to work with the DA's office.
It's by yourself, we won't kill anybody. It's the people behind. We've got to change hearts. We've got to let our youth know that we're not enemies. They're brothers and sisters. They need to love on each other.
The topic that raised tensions was the consent decree against the Raymond Detention Center.
Tell the people what they need to know. Just like saying I am 400 strong with employees. You show me 400 employees and I'll show you Santa Claus. So look, let me just tell you, this is nothing more than a facade, and this is what this whole administration been. Lies after lies. We got to get the lies out.
Listen to somebody who's never been in that system where I'm sitting, or you can listen to somebody that's in the system. And I'm going to be very clear about this. This ain't a constable job. This is a sheriff job. That's an institution of many, not an institution of one. And I'm going to say that again as much as I need to say it. Thank you very much.
And that I'm the only one up here who has dealt with the Department of Justice special litigation and pattern and practices as it relates to consent decrees. I'm experienced in doing that. I did it for a living.
The majority of the candidates did agree that a new jail is needed and an increase in community policing. The election is next Tuesday, November 2nd. In Jackson, Anthony Howard, 12 News.
By the way, you can watch the full debate on the Facebook page of JSU-TV, and we'll bring you voting results as they come in from the Hinds County Sheriff's race to the state Senate election for District 38 and many more. 12 News is your local election headquarters. Coming up, more from our conversation on crime and how to fight it with JSU criminologist Kevin Levine. It wasn't long ago that Governor Tate Reeves directed Capitol Police and the Highway Patrol officers to increase their cooperation with the Jackson Police and such traffic things like neighborhood patrols and traffic enforcement, just to name a few. What do you think of that move, and do you see a positive impact on what the governor was trying to do?
I think it is a good move because shared resources, although it's typically illegal, but you can share manpower in that way because we're not metro policing. That's another way around metro policing. So I think that's an outstanding move. I think we've just did an operation at the jail, as you know. I was a part of that operation. We had a multi-jurisdiction assist us, and I looked around that night and I said, wow, wouldn't this be beautiful if we can do this across the city? I mean, start on one end of the city and work in, but not just to make arrests, but to send a signal that the law enforcement community as well as the community we are united as one, and we're going to take back our city.
What about the interagency agreements or interlocal agreements you have between the Sheriff's Department and JPD? I know we touched on that. How important is that relationship between the two agencies?
Memorandums of understanding are very, very, very important. They spell out the who, what, when, where, and how of how we're going to work together. Who's going to do it, how, the resources, and it gives a clear-cut understanding of what's expected from each agency. So those memorandums of understanding are very, very important and shouldn't be taken very lightly and need to be as detailed as possible to be targeted toward what the goal is.
And who decides what it is that the Sheriff's Department will do to help the city? Is that between the chief and the sheriff, or the mayor and the Sheriff's Department? How does that go about?
Well, a good sheriff can take the initiative and see a problem because he's the chief law enforcement officer of the county, and go ahead and take some kind of action in the city, but it's always a courtesy to talk with the police chief. And then again, on the other side of that coin, the police chief, if they see a need, they can reach out to the sheriff of the county, not just Hinds County, any county, and say, hey, we need your assistance. And I think that's happening with between JPD and Hinds County. We do a lot of operations with them. I do have a lot of free reign to work with their DART unit, and I've worked with their warrants unit. I have a team of street crime in the flex unit, and that's what we do. We go out and, matter of fact, we're helping Terry. I get a lot of calls from Terry. I get a call from Edwards. So the sheriff on that end, we're trying to assist these areas and getting a handle on this crime, because the crime, Terry issue is Jackson issue. Raymond issue is Jackson. You can't just say that's your problem. These individuals have car and will travel. And so you have to address it at wherever a need is.
And how concerned are you? I mean, we've been spending a lot of time talking about the issues within the city of Jackson, but the Sheriff's Department looks at the whole county. How concerned are you about other issues outside of the city of Jackson when you talk about the county of Hinds?
Well, again, when you have the criminal element dictating your resources, then something is going to go neglected. Okay, you can try your best to mitigate that neglect, but if we're all tied up in the city, then there have been times I had to call the assistant chief or the chief from Terry and say, look, we can't help you tonight. We have to make a tough decision who needs us most, and but we will get back to you. So again, that's just a prime example of the criminal element dictating how we use our resources. I would love to be able to just go and help Terry, but if Jackson has a serious problem, then we need to go and help them where the largest concentration of our population is in the county.
Since there are some resource challenges, what can the people in the community do within the city and the county to help law enforcement deal with some of these issues?
That's a good question. That brings me to community policing. Okay, law enforcement in this state, in this country as a whole, has gone through 4 different eras: the political, professional, community policing, which actually started in the 70s. And now we're actually transitioning out of community policing era into what's called the Homeland Security era. But the good part about that is they have some of the similar components. So it's not a big swing from one to other. What it does, it makes the community a viable stakeholder in the crime solving issue. To give an example, your area, if you have a problem that occurs at 9 o'clock at night, well, if I can have an officer, when we talk about resources, if I can have an officer that's assigned, let's say I got a reserve unit. I want to assign my reserve unit to your neighborhood association where y'all meet once a month. That officer comes to your meeting and you all develop a relationship with that officer. That's an improvement on community police relations and community police communication. So once you tell that officer what your problems are, hey, they're doing this at this time of night and during the day or whatever in this house, you take that officer brings that back to his inline supervisor, and that information flows up the chain to the chief where the decision makings are made, and then we can come up with solutions. But those solutions include recommendations from that particular community. We call that empowering the community. And it's good because I don't sleep there at night. If you say it's happening at 10 o'clock at night, it's happening at 10 o'clock at night. So now we can address that. So then we have to come back and a few weeks later and say, hey, how is that working? Well, you know what, Deputy, They now do it at 12 o'clock. Okay, that's fine. So let's shift our resources to 12 o'clock. So now guess who's your boots on the ground, and guess who's extra eyes and ears for you? That community that now trusts you. Like I told you, I had a grandmother telling on her grandkids, and they, to this day, they don't know it was their grandmother telling on them. So that kind of trust is very important, and it gives them, and I can tell them, hey, well, what's the best way do you think we can address it? And let them tell you. You can't just say, well, no, I'm the police. No, you have to bring the community in and make them an active participant in what we call problem-oriented policing, POP. And that's a part of the COP, the cops, community-oriented policing. So that is very, very important. That community, that's how I was able to clean up a lot of areas. And without having to make an arrest, they would tell me what's going on. We shift that manpower over there, and we agitated them until they move on.
All right. Kevin Levine?
Yes.
Thank you for joining us and for this Mississippi Insight. Appreciate you.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
All right. Good seeing you. All right. Big thanks to JSU's Kevin Levine and 12 News' Anthony Howard for their contributions this week. We'll be back next weekend with more of the political and current affairs coverage that you demand. I'm Byron Brown. From all of us here at 12 News, make it a great weekend.